On a crisp September night in the Rockies, I was driving Highway 12 between Idaho Springs and Georgetown, a route as familiar to me as the back of my hand. With 6 hours already behind the wheel, most rest stops were closed and classic rock hummed softly on the radio. Something caught my eye, a pure white light, unnaturally bright, hovering about 100 feet off the ground to my right. At first, I thought it might be a maintenance truck's floodlight, but something felt different. No sound, no movement, just this steady, unwavering light tracking alongside my truck. I'm a truck driver with 15 years on the road, and I've seen my share of strange things at night. But this was something else entirely. The light's behavior defied logic. Every time I drove under an overpass, it would vanish instantly, like someone flipping a switch, only to reappear exactly where it had been before. As the road wound through a narrow section hemmed in by cliffs and thick forest, with no houses or businesses nearby, the light remained constant. Mountain shadows deepened and fog rolled in, making the phenomenon even more prominent. I tried rationalizing it, maybe a survey drone, but I'd seen those before, and they always had blinking red lights. This was silent, steady, and unnervingly solid. When I slowed down, the light matched my speed precisely. When I sped up, it did too. It felt like an invisible force was tracking me, maintaining a constant distance. At a turnout, I stopped to stretch and catch my breath. The light waited just past the last overpass. I scanned the area, no trucks, no workers, just forest and rocks. My trucker instincts were on high alert. This wasn't normal. This wasn't explainable. This was something entirely beyond my comprehension. No, I was working the overnight shift as a security guard at an isolated industrial site just outside Spokane, Washington. The bike place was one of those big chemical plants, fenced off, surrounded by dense forest, way too quiet at night. My job mostly involved sitting in the K-roll room, watching monitors, checking doors, and doing rounds every couple hours. Most nights were boring as hell. This happened about 3 months ago, right as fall was settling in. Nights were cold, the air heavy with the smell of wet leaves and earth, and a thick fog sometimes rolled in, luring the floodlights around the perimeter. I got to work around 10 p.m. and clocked in, not expecting anything unusual. On my way to work, I decided to check for road work, but the mountain's dead zone killed my signal. A sense of isolation crept over me. The road behind was dark and empty, with a light sitting there, watching and waiting. Back in the truck, as soon as I passed the next overpass, the light reappeared. Now it was closer, maybe 50 feet up, hovering perfectly in line with my passenger window. It wasn't a typical light source. No structure, no shape, just a pure white orb, smooth as a spotlight suspended in midair. The silence was the most unnerving part. No mechanical hum, no drone, no buzzing, just absolute quiet. Even with my truck's loud engine running, I kept glancing over, searching for any hint of explanation. A shadow, a frame, a wire, anything. But there was nothing, just that perfect circular light. Driving slower now, my eyes darted between the road and the mysterious light. An unsettling feeling of being watched, of being followed by something invisible, grew stronger. It was a sensation beyond simple fear, something deeper, more primal. I didn't brake or swerve, just felt a deep, creeping unease, like something didn't belong here, and I wasn't supposed to see it. When I finally hit the outskirts of town, the light vanished once I crossed beneath the last overpass before the highway flattened out into normal streets and buildings. I stopped at a gas station, tried to tell the clerk what happened, but he just laughed it off and said, I probably saw a drone or a reflection. I didn't push it. Everyone who drives these mountain roads probably has a... The rest of my trip was uneventful. I kept looking back in my mirrors, but didn't see anything else. I figured I'd just chalk it up to fatigue or some kind of weird optical illusion. The next day, I looked online for any reports about strange lights or drone tests in the area. Nothing. The night shift was dragging on, with my thermos of black coffee slowly cooling beside me. Machinery hummed softly in the background, punctuated by occasional metallic creaks in the cool air. Around 3 a.m., my eyelids grew heavy as I half listened to maintenance crew radio chatter while scrolling through camera feeds. At exactly 3:12 a.m., every motion-triggered camera on the main screen lit up simultaneously. This was bizarre. No movement had been detected for hours before this moment. I expected to see a stray animal or a worker out of place, but the footage showed only pure white static. No blurry shapes, no shadows, just noise. I refreshed the feed repeatedly and checked system logs. Everything confirmed the sensors had triggered and cameras attempted to record, yet no images appeared. Switching between different camera angles yielded the same result. Pure static, all time-stamped at 3:12 a.m., with no signs of movement. Calling my supervisor, I reported the incident. He dismissed it as a technical error, telling me to monitor the situation. Unconvinced, I decided to conduct a physical inspection. Grabbing my flashlight, I ventured out into the foggy night. The cold air was thick, my flashlight's beam struggling to penetrate the dense mist. Walking the perimeter slowly, I strained to hear anything. Beyond my own footsteps in the distant plant hum, everything seemed normal. No footprints, no broken branches, security gates locked, fences intact. Yet the camera static nagged at me. Later, as I drove home, I couldn't shake the memory of something strange. There was a light, a silent, steady white light, hanging just off the road, keeping pace with me like it was waiting or watching. I checked for news, scanned social media, nothing. I even called the highway patrol. They said nothing was scheduled or reported for that stretch that night. I don't know what I saw. Whatever it was, it didn't make a sound or move like any machine I've ever known. It just stayed here, following me under the overpasses, then disappearing when the road hit it. Since then, I've been back on that route a few times, but the light never showed up again. It feels odd to say this, but I still think about it sometimes. Every time I drive through those overpasses in my head, I remember it blinking out just before I pass beneath, then popping back on right after. Nothing about it made sense. Nothing explained why it followed me or why it vanished under the overpasses. It was real though, and I can't quite figure out why. My night shifts had always been quiet, but that changed the moment the digital clock started flickering strangely. Seconds jumped erratically between 3:11 and 313, and the monitors developed a subtle shimmer that seemed to struggle against maintaining their image. After rebooting the system, the cameras returned to normal. Static disappeared and everything looked stable, yet something felt different. A heavy silence crept in, like fog following me indoors. I remained alert, my routine unchanged, but my senses heightened. For weeks after that first incident, nothing unusual occurred. Maintenance logs showed no scheduled activity around 3 a.m., and my co-workers reported nothing out of the ordinary. But something continued to nag at me. Whenever thick fog rolled in, unsettling moments would emerge. Monitors would twitch briefly. Static would flicker, shadows would move at the screen's edge, but vanish when I looked directly. I considered quitting. The isolation was wearing me down, and that initial static event had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. However, the job paid decently, and I had no other prospects. 2 weeks later, everything changed dramatically. Midway through my shift, the camera system went completely dark for 10 solid seconds before flickering back to life. When the feeds returned, motion-triggered cameras were blank, pure black screens. A familiar hollow feeling rushed over me, and I ran outside with my flashlight, heart racing. The fog was heavier than ever, obscuring everything beyond the fence line. I spent nearly an hour scanning the silent woods, but found nothing. Back inside, I discovered something bizarre. An old chipped mug with a faded logo sitting on my desk. I knew I hadn't brought it, and when I asked Dan, the day guard, he insisted he hadn't touched anything. Strange occurrences became routine. Clocks would blink unexpectedly. Screens would freeze momentarily. Static would appear and vanish without warning. The fog seemed to grow thicker each night, creeping closer as if alive. Near the end of one shift, something truly unnerved me. Muffled voices through the radio. Soft whispers just beyond understanding, like conversations happening just out of reach. I called out but received no response. I could feel its presence through the cameras even when the screen showed nothing. And I've been fascinated with radio since childhood, and my small house, perched on the edge of rural Vermont, has always been my quiet sanctuary. My radio setup is simple, just a piece. Transceiver connected to a homemade roof antenna. Nothing elaborate, but it's my personal escape from daily noise. That particular night in late April was cool and crisp, with the air rich with earthy scents and damp vegetation. Around 10 p.m., as was my routine, I scanned the HF bands, listening intently and occasionally making calls. My loyal dog rested beside the desk, creating a sense of normalcy. Just after 11 p.m., something changed. A faint clicking sound emerged, so subtle it could almost be missed, yet unmistakably deliberate. As I adjusted the frequency, I realized these weren't random noises. They followed a perfect mechanical rhythm. 3 precise clicks, followed by an 11-second pause, then repeating exactly. I meticulously checked my equipment, suspecting interference or a technical glitch. Everything appeared functional, with the signal coming through clearly and without distortion. These clicks were sharp like Morse code, but no letters or words formed. No explanation presented itself. Weeks later, the incident still consumed my thoughts. I repeatedly reviewed footage, logs, and system records, searching for understanding. Something felt just beyond comprehension, hidden in the camera's static and fog. At 3:12 a.m., the cameras showed only blank interference. When I radioed the channel, silence answered. Dan, who worked the previous shift, reported nothing unusual. Yet during those late nights when thick fog settles around the area, an unsettling sensation persists, a feeling of not being alone. Was this a system malfunction or something more mysterious? For nearly 45 minutes, the radio broadcast its eerie, repetitive pattern. Using my Nook, I tracked the intervals with precision. The clicks remained unnervingly consistent, exactly 11 seconds between each 3-click sequence, never accelerating, never slowing. The mechanical rhythm felt deliberate, almost intentional. My attempts to communicate on the frequency were met with absolute silence. Switching bands and searching for surrounding signals proved futile. These clicks existed in perfect isolation, quietly broadcasting into the dark night. By midnight, I found myself outside, examining the antenna. The sky was a crystal-clear canvas, studded with sharp, brilliant stars. No aircraft or satellites blinked overhead, just an unbroken, mysterious silence. The neighborhood lay still, quiet except for distant traffic sounds and occasional tree rustlings. I was attuned to the radio, wondering if I was imagining meaning into mechanical noise. The clicks persisted, steady and unchanging. Using the spectrum analyzer, I discovered no obvious signal spike or modulation. Just 3 distinct sharp taps repeating every 11 seconds. A strange anticipation gripped me. I felt like I was waiting, but nothing happened. The clicks continued their relentless pattern until 11:40 when they suddenly stopped. As if someone had flipped a switch, silence replaced the rhythmic sound, static returning to the channel. I sat motionless, fingers on the dial, expecting the pattern to restart. It didn't. Speculation ran through my mind. An encrypted signal, an experimental transmitter, an unknown digital communication method. Online research and radio forums yielded nothing. No announcements, no similar reports. Sharing the experience with fellow ham radio operators produced mixed reactions. Some dismissed it casually, others suggested interference or equipment malfunction, yet no one could explain the perfect timing or the precise 3-click repetition. Days later, I attempted to recreate the experience, tuning into the same frequency at the same time. Nothing, just static and background noise. I continued listening on subsequent nights, hoping for a recurrence, but the mysterious signal never returned. Sometimes I could swear I hear the faintest echo of those clicks. The night sky was perfect that night in my tiny Central Oregon town. I'm Jamie, 17, and with the windows locked tight by my parents, I had a sneaking out strategy. Around 11:30 p.m., I carefully slipped through my bedroom window, hoping my parents were asleep and my dog wouldn't bark. I grabbed my little telescope and headed to the open farmland behind our house. With no street lights, the stars burst into brilliant clarity. The early summer air carried a thin hint of spring's lingering chill. Near the field's edge where grass meets dirt road, I set up my telescope and started scanning the sky, searching for constellations and satellites. At first everything seemed normal, just the usual star spread and a faint town glow, but after about 20 minutes, something felt off. The crickets had gone silent, an unusual quiet for that time of night. The breeze stopped completely, and the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Not a massive black triangle suddenly materialized in the night sky, blocking out the stars with impossible smoothness. It wasn't a typical shape, more like someone had precisely cut a perfect geometric piece from the darkness overhead. No texture, no edges, just an empty void moving with unnatural precision. What struck me most was the complete silence. No engine noise, no hum, nothing. Just this dark shape gliding across the heavens. Its movement was so slow and steady that it couldn't be a plane or drone. No blinking lights, no typical aircraft markers, just a solid dark shape that seemed to swallow the starlight around it. My telescope was useless. The object was so dark I could barely track it through the lens. Its edges were razor-sharp and unnaturally straight, nothing like the soft shifting edges of clouds. My heart raced because I knew this wasn't something ordinary. Part of me wanted to run inside and lock the door, but I couldn't look away. The triangle glided from northwest to southeast, covering about half the sky in just 5 minutes. Then, without warning, it vanished. One moment it was there, blocking out the stars, and the next, nothing, no sound, no flash, just gone. I sat frozen, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Later that night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of strange clicks, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat just beyond hearing. I wasn't sure if it was a machine, a radio phenomenon, or something unexplainable. Sound had filled the room, precise and consistent, then vanished. Now I keep my radio on at night, hoping it might return. The world slowly returned to normal. Crickets started chirping. The breeze picked up. Stars began twinkling again, as if nothing had happened. I packed up my telescope, kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the triangle to reappear, but it didn't. I was too solid, too large to be a hallucination. Something had been up there, watching, waiting, deliberately avoiding detection. I never told anyone. My friends would never understand, always caught up in parties, sports, and online trends. But every night after that, I found myself scanning the sky, hoping for answers. Nothing ever came. Nevada's quiet landscape became my sanctuary after years of contracting work. My name's Roy, and I craved solitude far from city noise. A dry lake bed stretches out just a mile from my home, flat and cracked, with nothing but endless stars overhead. 2 years back, something strange started happening out here. Not every night, but with an almost mechanical precision. Always at 2:33 a.m. sharp. Pure chance led me to first notice it. One sleepless night around 2:30, I grabbed my old binoculars and peered out the window. That's when I spotted a tiny, faint light on the lake bed. Not like a flashlight, but a pale, hazy glow about as bright as a distant street lamp, yet completely motionless. I wondered if someone was camping or had a broken-down vehicle. But there were no sounds, no engines, no voices, no movement at all. When I looked again a minute later, the light had vanished. The next night, I set an alarm to investigate. Right on schedule at 2:33, the light reappeared in the exact same spot. Through my binoculars, I could see a pinprick of pale light hovering just above the cracked ground. It didn't flicker or move, just hung there like a distant star dropped onto the earth. I watched for about 10 minutes. Nothing changed. No brightness shift. No shape alteration. Then it simply disappeared as if someone had flipped the switch. After several nights, I started keeping a log. Each night I'd set my alarm, grab the binoculars and watch. Sometimes it appeared, sometimes it didn't. But when it did, it was always at 2:33. Not a minute either or later. The location was incredibly consistent. Dead center of a dry lake bed with no roads or rails nearby. Just flat, cracked mud stretching out in every direction, No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing to suggest human presence. One late spring night, I decided to investigate. Around 2:15 a.m., I grabbed my flashlight and binoculars and headed out. The air was cool and dry, the sky crystal clear. By 2:25, I was at the lake bed's edge, facing the spot where the light typically appeared. I sat quietly. The memory haunts me. This silent light slowly drifting across the stars, vanishing like it never existed. Was it a secret military experiment? An unexplained weather phenomenon? I can't be sure, but it's etched in my mind like a black hole where stars once moved, making the night feel less empty than I thought. Military testing range from the 50s and 60s feels desolate and harsh. Nothing about this landscape suggests comfortable living. Night after night, I've watched a faint light that never moves, simply appearing and vanishing in the exact same location, utterly silent. My first encounter was different. I felt the parched earth beneath me, surrounded by complete silence broken only by my own breathing and occasional wildlife rustling nearby. At precisely 2:33, a pale light materialized close by, maybe 100 feet away, hovering just above ground. When I swept my flashlight across it, something unusual happened. The light seemed to absorb my beam, swallowing it, as if it weren't even there. A chill ran down my spine. I decided not to investigate further. Strange occurrences began following that initial sighting. Around 2:30 a.m., my home's power would flicker briefly. Just a second or two, my emergency CB radio would intermittently pick up odd static, different from normal interference. It sounded like soft whispers or low clicking, always cutting out just before 2:33. When I shared these experiences with Mike, my neighbor and local history buff, he was initially skeptical. But older residents had reported similar stories. Mysterious lights over the lake bed had been a long-standing local legend, fleeting glimpses lasting mere minutes, with few concrete details. Everything seemed to converge on that specific moment and location. About a month later, something else caught my attention. Through my binoculars, near the lake bed's edge, I spotted a shadow. It wasn't human-shaped, but moved deliberately, as if pacing or circling. The moment I blinked, it vanished. No sound, just absolute silence. Some nights I doubt myself. Was loneliness and boredom creating these visions? But then the light would return, right on schedule, pulling me back into observation. The last time remains vivid in my memory, a persistent reminder that something unexplained inhabits this landscape. I know. While now, it was late October in rural Vermont, with cool, damp air hanging over the landscape. The Saturday morning was just breaking, a deep grey blue sky not yet touched by sunrise. Thick fog softened the distant tree line, making the horizon seem to dissolve into mist. Milo and I were on our usual walking route, moving down the lane behind our house, past the abandoned Miller farm, and into the open field that stretched between the road and the woods. The area was growing wild, but it remained one of Milo's favorite spots where he could run freely without a leash. I tossed his ball, and he chased it through the dew-covered grass, the thin fog hanging low. Near the fence separating the field from the neighboring property, something caught my attention. A strange shape hovered about 100 yards away, suspended and motionless 6 or 7 feet above the ground. It wasn't like any weather balloon or farm equipment I'd seen before. Oval-shaped and roughly the size of a small car, the object had a bizarre surface, simultaneously dull and reflective, almost like a matte chrome coating that didn't gleam or reflect the surrounding environment. Milo's behavior suddenly changed. He stopped moving, sat down beside me, and became completely still. His ears were perked, eyes fixed intently on the shape. This was unusual. Normally, he'd be pulling me forward, eager to explore. I called his name several times and tried tugging his leash, but he remained seated, rigid, and unmoving. An eerie silence had fallen over the morning. Typical sounds, birds chirping, wind rustling, distant tractors had vanished, as if the world had suddenly gone quiet. Weeks ago, at 2:32 a.m., after checking some house wiring, I grabbed my binoculars. At 2:33, the familiar glow appeared, exactly where it always did. This time felt different. It seemed to linger, almost hesitating before disappearing. That morning, I woke up exhausted with a foggy feeling. No strange memories, just a sense of unrest. I've ruled out all logical explanations. It's too precise to be random, yet not threatening. I could report it, but who would believe me? A light that appears at 2:33 a.m. on an empty lake bed consistently for years. So I keep watching. Not every night, but often enough. Always with binoculars, always waiting. The light comes and goes like clockwork. Quiet and distant. I'm still trying to understand. Does it mean something or nothing at all? The summer of 2019 was fairly typical during my time as a park ranger at Mount Pisgah State Park. My days usually involved routine patrols, maintenance checks, and occasional guided hikes. Nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. That changed one misty morning when something unexplained appeared in the field. The fog was thick, rolling over the grass and trees, creating a hazy landscape. But amid this blurry scene, a shape stood out, unnervingly clear and solid, unlike everything else around it. Milo, my dog, sensed something was different. He pulled at the leash, acting tense and unsettled. My dog's behavior caught my attention more than the shape itself. Normally relaxed, Milo seemed genuinely disturbed, as if he'd witnessed something dangerous or beyond understanding. I watched the form, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was it exhaustion playing tricks on my mind? An overactive imagination? But the tension felt real. In just a moment of distraction, when I glanced down at my watch, the shape vanished completely. No sound, no movement, no disturbance in the fog. It was simply gone. When I mentioned this to my neighbor Hank, a local who knew the area well, his reaction made me doubt my initial explanations. He was skeptical, suggesting it might have been a piece of trash or a light reflection, yet he couldn't fully dismiss my account. In the days that followed, I watched the field carefully during our morning walks. Everything appeared normal. Fog rolling in, grass growing, crows calling from old trees. But sometimes, when the fog was thick, an eerie feeling of being watched would creep over me. Milo's ears would twitch, and he'd stare intently at what seemed like empty space. I asked Hank about local stories, and he mentioned only vague legends about strange lights and sounds that nobody took seriously. The idea of returning to investigate at night crossed my mind, but the memory of that silent, hovering shape and Milo's reaction held me back. To this day, I can't explain what I saw that morning. It was silent, motionless, and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind nothing but an unsettling mystery. Early that July morning, around 5 a.m., I found myself on an unusual assignment. My supervisor had called me to investigate something in a restricted area of the park, a section off-limits due to sensitive bird nesting grounds and erosion risks. The journey wasn't straightforward. The main trail ended about half a mile from my destination, forcing me to navigate an old service road through dense forest. A thick fog hung low, reducing visibility to barely 20 feet ahead. Damp air carried the scent of wet pine and earth. My standard gear included boots, radio, flashlight, and notebook. The radio remained quiet except for routine morning check-ins, and no other rangers were on duty nearby. After hiking through patches of fir and cedar trees, I stumbled upon an unmarked clearing that would challenge everything I thought I knew. Right in the center was something extraordinary, a perfect 10-foot circle of completely scorched grass. The grass was black and brittle, as if burned to a crisp. Yet inexplicably, nothing surrounding the circle showed any fire damage. Nearby trees and shrubs looked completely untouched. No singed bark, no burnt leaves, no smoke smell. Kneeling, I examined the circle's edges. The soil underneath was dry and cracked, but not in a way that suggested recent burning. It was almost as if the grass had been incinerated, without fire ever reaching the ground. I carefully circled the clearing, searching for signs of human activity, cigarette butts, campfire remnants, footprints, but found nothing. The ground remained undisturbed. I radioed dispatch, reporting my location and describing the scene. I asked if any controlled burns had been scheduled. Their response was definitive. The park had been quiet, with no fire reports or unusual incidents, The morning fog made everything look washed out, but the circle remained unmistakable, perfectly round, as if someone had used a giant stencil and then burned the grass inside with surgical precision. It didn't look natural at all. After spending about 20 minutes checking the perimeter, an increasing unease settled over me. The silence was profound. No birds, no insects, no sounds of life. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. The early morning forest, typically alive with noise, was dead silent. Then a faint humming began to emerge. Initially I thought it might be a radio issue, but when I checked, the device was off. The sound wasn't coming from any machines or equipment. Some mysteries I've learned defy explanation, and this was definitely one of them. Now, first discovered the strange, perfectly burned circle during my time as a park ranger. The clearing was unlike anything I'd seen before, a pristine, scorched ring with no signs of typical fire damage. The ground was dry and cracked, the grass burned black in an unnaturally precise shape. Park management told me to monitor the area, but something about it never felt right. Over the next few days, I returned with other rangers during daylight hours. The circle remained unchanged. Mark, another ranger, suggested it might have been a lightning strike, but I knew that was impossible. Recent weather reports showed no storms, and lightning typically leaves widespread destruction, not a tidy geometric shape. When Mark and I investigated further, our GPS showed the clearing coordinates consistently off by hundreds of feet. We recalibrated multiple times, but the readings never matched our actual location. It was as if the spot itself was shifting or our instruments were malfunctioning. We fenced off the entire area, restricting public access, and I began reviewing perimeter cameras. Nothing unusual was recorded, no humans, no animals large enough to create such precise burn marks. About a week later, during a routine patrol near the restricted zone, I caught a quick flash of light through the trees. I stopped and stared, but when I turned, it had vanished. This memory connects to another strange night from about 3 years ago. It was early July, and 4 of us were driving west on Route 2 between Alliance and Ellsworth, Nebraska. Lacey had suggested stargazing near the sand hills away from town lights. Tanner was always eager for a drive, and Drew and I didn't particularly care, so we went along. We packed a cooler with drinks, a Bluetooth speaker, and blankets to sit on in the grass. The sky was crystal clear with no clouds and a low amber moon rising behind us. The road seemed to extend endlessly, with no headlights visible in front or behind. About an hour into our drive, we first noticed the lights. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual, but something felt off. Looking back, I can't shake the memory of that strange night or the unexplained scorched circle. Soil tests came back clean, and the grass burned in an unnatural way. Eventually, I stopped mentioning it at work, but the mystery remained. The trees had always seemed different that night at the ranger station. A strange, silent, scorched patch lingered among them, making me uneasy, like I was witnessing something I shouldn't have seen. Every time I drove past that section of the park, I'd glance toward the trees, wondering, is the circle still here? Has it moved? Is it waiting? Our drive started out quiet enough. Lacey was the first to notice something unusual. She pointed out her window at a line of 5 small white lights hovering low above the fields, maybe 100 feet off the ground. Drew leaned forward, immediately observing something odd. These weren't typical aircraft lights. They weren't blinking, just steady white dots hanging motionless in the air. Tanner instinctively slowed the car as we watched intently. At first, the lights seemed frozen like suspended lanterns. Then they began to move, gliding smoothly and silently, pacing us just off the right side of the road. I rolled down the window, expecting engine noise, but heard only wind, tires, and distant cicadas. "Too low for a plane," Lacey commented. "Too still," Drew added. Tanner remained silent, his eyes shifting between the road and the mysterious lights. We watched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably just a minute or two. Then something strange happened. The rightmost light suddenly vanished. Not dimmed, not drifted away, but disappeared as if a switch had been flipped. Over the next 10 seconds, each light winked out from right to left in precise 5-second intervals, The final light, closest to our road, was the last to go. Tanner pulled onto the gravel shoulder. We got out, surrounded by an eerie silence. Insects buzzed in the grass, and distant power lines hummed softly. Lacey pointed to where the lights had been. They were right here, weren't they? Drew walked into the grass, scanning the sky. Maybe drones, he suggested, but no one responded. Over the next month, I kept thinking about the clearing, the silence, the humming, the odd GPS readings, the flickering lights. Each time I'd visit, the clearing looked different, sometimes thick with fog, other times clear as day, but the scorched circle remained perfect, unchanged. We drove in silence. After the strange sound stopped, the experience felt different. The perfect symmetry, the unnatural stillness. I didn't feel like drones were around at all. Tanner finally broke the stillness, saying we should keep moving. We got back in the car without music. The speaker remained on but quiet. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. Lacey kept looking out the window. Drew stared ahead and I watched the sky. Tanner drove slower than before, his face unreadable, as if expecting something to suddenly appear. 15 minutes later, we pulled off at an old turnout with a rusted gate and a faded no trespassing sign. Tanner killed the engine and an intense silence enveloped us. The kind of quiet you only experience far from civilization. "Let's sit here for a while," he suggested. We wanted to see if anything else would happen. Without discussion, we grabbed our blankets and walked into the grass. Comfort wasn't the goal. We just spread out and looked up. The night was perfect for stargazing. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a luminous ribbon. I spotted a satellite and Lacey pointed out a shooting star. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then Drew broke the calm. "Wait, what's that?" He pointed straight up at a small white light moving steadily across the peak sky, much higher than the previous ones. I initially thought it was a satellite, but its behavior was unlike anything I'd seen before. Suddenly, it stopped completely. No drifting, After about 10 seconds, it made a sharp 90° turn and moved sideways before vanishing. We all witnessed it. No one spoke. We remained there for another 20 minutes, but nothing else occurred. Tanner decided we should leave and no one objected. The return drive was eerily silent. Even Lacey, usually talkative, stayed quiet. Back in Alliance, we tried to normalize the night by hitting the McDonald's drive-thru. Sitting in the parking lot eating fries, we avoided mentioning what we'd seen. Days later, I asked Tanner if he'd ever experienced anything similar. He said no, but shared that his dad, a former lineman in the Sandhills, had once mentioned strange silent lights over the prairie, though he never elaborated. Late October 2019 was just another night at Eppley Airfield in Omaha. I'd been working radar operations here for over 6 years, and solo shifts were nothing out of the ordinary. The night was cold but clear with just a few high clouds. Not drifting in from the west, the night was quiet. Traffic was light, a few commercial arrivals, a FedEx departure, and some private jets from Council Bluffs. Lynn was doing a routine perimeter fence inspection while I watched the scopes and sipped coffee. Then things got weird. Around 8:40 p.m., a single radar ping appeared just west of the Missouri River near Elkhorn. At first, I thought it was a reflection, something that can happen with weather or terrain, but it showed up again slightly north for 2 sweeps before vanishing. I logged the contact as unknown. No transponder, no altitude, just an intermittent visual track. 4 minutes later, it reappeared east of the river, outside Omaha's Class C boundary. The speed was incredible. Fighter jet fast, with no transponder code. I called out on the emergency frequency, but got no response. Between 8:50 and 9 o'clock, the object, or whatever it was, appeared 7 times on my scope. Each appearance lasted just a second or two, never in the same location. It jumped from north of the airport to south, then out toward Bell, even crossing the river again. The movement defied logic. Some jumps covered over 20 miles in less than 10 seconds. I noticed these radar blips were flickering with 0 altitude data and no identification. No squawk, nothing. Even though we're not technically supposed to, I started screen recording. It's not unheard of when something seems off. Around 9:10, I called the supervisor desk. Darrell, an older ex-Air Force guy, was on duty that night. I explained the intermittent radar contact with an unidentifiable, non-transponding object moving erratically. After a long pause, he simply asked how long I'd been watching it. When I said about 30 minutes, he just told me to keep logging and take no further action. I suggested notifying Offutt Air Force Base, but he dismissed the idea, saying they'd see it if needed. His response felt rehearsed, like he'd said it before. By 9:12, the object had vanished. Afterward, I searched everywhere for confirmation. No news articles, no air traffic reports, nothing online. It was like the entire incident never happened, except I knew what I'd seen, those lights blinking out one by one as if someone was deliberately switching them off. For nearly an hour, nothing else appeared on my scope. I ran diagnostics, checked antenna status, everything checked out green. When Lynn returned from her walk around 10:30, I was still thinking about that night, wondering what I had witnessed. No, I always write in blue ink, but the page was now entirely in black, my entry completely removed. When I asked Darrell about it, he suggested I must have forgotten to write it down. When I insisted I had, he claimed the page might have been torn, which wasn't true. We were camping near Black Mesa, just west of the Colorado-New Mexico border at the end of September. Days were still warm, but nights dropped hard. No cell reception, barely any light pollution, perfect for stargazing. Me, my cousin Nathan, his girlfriend Emily, and our friends Felix and Dan. We had 3 tents in a fire pit made from scavenged rocks. Nothing fancy. After hiking about 3 miles off a dirt access road, we were ready to get away from everything. The first day and night went smoothly. We hiked, made dinner over the fire, drank cheap beer, and shared some weed. Around 10, we sprawled on the rocks looking up. Nathan, who's into astronomy, pointed out Saturn and constellations. I had my Casio atomic watch, and Nathan and Emily had digital watches too. We checked them, all perfectly synced. I went to my solo tent around midnight. The others stayed up longer. I remember waking up cold around 2:30, pulling my hoodie over my face. Desert nights are freezing. Then I woke up with this intense pressure behind my eyes and blood on my upper lip. I wiped my nose, and it came away red. No gushing, just a slow bleed from dry air, but something felt off. I burned with a weird metallic taste like ozone, hard to describe. That same night, our radar system rebooted at 2 a.m. unusual, unless something was wrong. I described what I'd seen. Her response was dismissive. Was I the river again? I insisted I was moving all over the place. She grew quiet, then cryptically mentioned we get stuff like that maybe once or twice a year, and that they tell us not to chase it. When I pressed her about who they were, she just shrugged. After finishing my midnight shift, I loaded the screen recording onto a USB. Though 24 minutes long, most was dead air. The object only appeared in 6 or 7 brief moments. Watching those moments repeatedly, I noticed the track lines were jagged and inconsistent, almost like the object was skipping. The radar system isn't designed to track fast-moving targets at those angles. Yet, even accounting for that, something seemed impossible. At one point, the object jumped nearly 30 m from Fort Calhoun to east of Pilton in just 5 seconds. The next night, I discovered my logbook entry had vanished. Note, here's my rewrite. My name is Danny, I live in Hemp, and I was out in Joshua Tree that night, just past the last turnout near Keysview. I wasn't at the main overlook, but closer to the big granite boulders. It was around 2:30 in the morning, clear, dry, with no wind. The only sound was sand shifting under my boots. Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't explain what. When I discussed my experiences with the group, they mostly brushed me off. Nathan suggested I must have bumped something on my watch, but I knew that wasn't true. My watch doesn't just shift 41 minutes randomly. I showed them the sync screen confirming it had updated before we left. Emily asked about the time. Nathan said 6:04, but my watch read 6:45. Dan had slept soundly, and Felix only mentioned a slight headache from drinking. When I brought up my nosebleed and time discrepancy, they shrugged it off, attributing it to dry air or campfire smoke. I sat on a rock about 10 feet from camp and waited. The sun finally started rising around 5:50 according to other watches. Mine still showed past 6:30. Physically, I felt weird, like jet lag or altitude sickness, though we weren't high up. My balance was off, with the ground seeming to tilt slightly. Every time I moved, I had to catch myself. Returning to my tent, I tried to use my phone, but it was dead. My backup flashlight was, too, even though I knew it was charged before we left. The fire pit was just cold ash with the faintest glow under a few coals. Everyone else was still asleep, with no movement in any of the tents. My watch backlight showed 6:12 a.m., but the sky looked like the middle of the night. I always look for the Big Dipper automatically, and this time it simply wasn't there. The sky was a deep black dotted with stars, but something felt wrong. I stepped outside for water and noticed something immediately off. The air was unnaturally still. No bugs, no wind, just complete silence. I checked the update log after noticing some blips. No update had been pushed. No new blips. No odd readings. Everything seemed normal. I still have the screen recording. I watched it countless times. The blips didn't follow any standard flight pattern. They jumped point to point, clean, like skipping a stone across the screen. Whatever it was didn't belong in our airspace and didn't act like anything I've ever trekked. My entry was the only one missing from the log. Just my entry. Now, I headed out to Tree Solo after my friends bailed at the last minute. The small pull-off barely fit my car, and I hiked about 10 minutes up a flat ridge with no real trail, just boulders and open scrub. My plan wasn't to camp, just shoot some night sky photos before driving home. I'd been practicing night photography for the past year. Nothing professional. My gear was set up for long exposures of the Milky Way. Around 45 minutes in, something felt off. I wasn't even looking through the camera when I noticed. The day had been strange in subtle ways. Birds unusually quiet, an odd dead rabbit we'd found earlier, no bugs, no smell. That second night, I'd barely slept. I stayed outside with a headlamp and camera on a tripod, running a time-lapse from 1 o'clock to 4 a.m. At 3:17, the camera caught something weird. Oh, faint, perfectly horizontal blur across the middle of the shot. Too subtle to be a plane trail or satellite, just a pale light smear. The next shot, 30 seconds later, showed the sky normal. I showed Nathan the photo the next morning. He thought it was a lens flare, and I didn't argue. When we got back to the cars, something strange happened. My watch synced 41 minutes off, not 40 or 42, exactly 41. During a 25-second exposure, while stretching and watching the sky, I'd grown familiar with its patterns, constellations, satellites, even a faint meteor earlier. Then a point of light between Vega and Dem started moving. Its motion was slow and smooth, unlike a blinking plane or meteor trail. It traveled straight for about 10 seconds, then made a sharp 90° turn, not an arc, but an angle like following an invisible grid. I initially thought it might be a satellite adjusting orbit, but then it turned again, tracing another perfect right angle like an invisible square's edge. I was driving back to California after helping my sister move to Austin, not wanting to spend money on a motel. My truck was my home when needed, and I was somewhere along Route 62, not far from 29 Palms. Hours of driving had worn me down, and I planned to stop for the night past the last gas station in Parker. Close to 1:30 in the morning, I pulled off onto a dirt shoulder. No lights, no other vehicles, just the wide-open desert. The stars overhead glimmered, and dry air surrounded me with that low hum of absolute silence. I cracked the driver's window a few inches and shut off the engine. The desert has a way of distorting time, and I know how easy it is to zone out without realizing. I thought I'd only been sitting here for a minute or two, but when I looked back at the sky, something felt different. The summer triangle seemed altered. A star appeared to have moved or vanished entirely. I took my camera from the tripod and tried to focus, but by the time I looked through the viewfinder, it had stopped just hanging there, motionless and unchanged. While I stood trying to make sense of what I'd seen, it moved again. This time, a slow, deliberate diagonal motion followed by another turn. This wasn't like any satellite movement. I wasn't tracking the Earth's curve. Instead, it moved in rigid geometric shapes like someone methodically drawing on graph paper. For 3 or 4 minutes, the pattern continued, moving, stopping, turning, completely silent, with no trail. I attempted a long exposure to capture its path, but before the shutter could close, it vanished. No drifted away, no faded, simply blinked out. One moment present, the next gone. The surrounding stars remained unchanged, the sky looking exactly the same. Standing in the darkness, camera pressed against my chest, I felt oddly detached. Not scared exactly, but that strange sensation of walking into a room and forgetting why or noticing silence after noise stops. I decided to take a break and sit on a nearby boulder, pulling out my water bottle and checking my phone. No signal as expected. The time read 3:19 a.m. I only noted this because when I looked again later, it was 3:21, though it felt like much more time had passed. As I packed up my gear, a single light caught my attention far to the north, beyond the park boundary. At first, I assumed it was another vehicle. Not. I was motionless beside my car, watching a soft, steady white glow without the typical aircraft strobes. Minutes passed, and the light didn't change or move. As I started the engine and drove back toward the main road, I frequently checked my rearview mirror. The light remained exactly where it had been, not following, not approaching, just present. When I passed the bend near Ryan Mountain, it disappeared completely, replaced by trees, rocks, and darkness. I didn't immediately share the experience, not out of fear of disbelief, but because I couldn't articulate what I'd witnessed. Days later, I showed a coworker the long exposure photos. They appeared normal, clean star fields with nothing unusual. But I knew what I saw. That star moved with an unnatural, deliberate slowness, as if guided by something beyond our understanding. Since that night, I haven't returned to that place. The pre-dawn darkness hung heavy, and I stirred from a deep sleep, my hoodie bunched into a makeshift pillow. Something felt off, though I couldn't immediately pinpoint what. The truck was completely silent. No sounds, no movement, just an unsettling stillness. When I looked around, the windows caught my attention. Every single one was covered in a thick, strange fog, not the kind from breathing inside a closed vehicle, but a deliberate smear, as if someone had wiped them from the outside with a wet cloth. This made no sense. The air had been bone dry when I parked, with zero humidity or chance of condensation. Cautiously, I wiped a spot on the windshields inside. It remained clear, confirming the fog was definitely external. A strange unease settled in my stomach. I hesitated to turn on the dome light, feeling an inexplicable reluctance to illuminate whatever might be outside. Stepping out carefully, I noticed the ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel, completely dry. Walking slowly around the truck, I examined the windows more closely. The fog was applied in long, even swipes, almost like deliberate cleaning strokes. Some areas showed finger-like streaks, as if someone had meticulously wiped the glass from the outside. I crouched and checked underneath the vehicle. No footprints, no disturbances in the dirt. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional tick of the cooling engine. Something had happened here, but I couldn't explain what. The entire scene felt surreal. Night with Carl for night fishing at Goose Hollow Lake in late September, a quiet spot in northeastern Pennsylvania. The desert night was eerily silent, completely fogged in with no sign of anyone around. I started dozing off around 1:30 a.m., with my last phone check at 1:47 a.m. When I woke up, something felt off immediately. The clock read 5:42 a.m., but the sky remained pitch black. Not the early dawn light you'd expect. The time didn't make sense. It felt like I'd just blinked. Yet nearly 4 hours had supposedly passed. The truck felt different. The windows were fogged, the glass wiped clean, and there was this strange smell like old copper or ozone. Faint, but definitely present. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, but the road behind me was empty. Everything had seemed normal when I first started the truck. Headlights cutting through dirt and low shrubs. About 5 minutes after pulling back onto the road, I noticed the radio display had reset completely. time presets, everything. It was as if the battery had been disconnected, though I hadn't touched anything. My phone's clock was equally strange. The time didn't match the darkness outside, and I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the mountains were blocking the sun, or I'd simply lost track of time, but something didn't feel right. I made it to 29 Palms just after 6 a.m. when the sun finally rose. At a gas station, I grabbed coffee and used the bathroom. While washing my hands, I caught a glimpse of my reflection and noticed a thin red mark across my neck near my jaw. It looked like a pressure line from a tight seatbelt, but I'd only been wearing a hoodie with no collar. That's when everything started to unsettle me. The fogged windows, the white glass, the odd smell, the time, inconsistencies. None of it made sense. I tried finding rational explanations. Maybe someone had messed with the truck while I slept. Maybe the battery glitched. But I'd slept in this truck many times in different places, and I'd never seen windows fogged like this, especially not in the desert with no humidity and no breath inside. I drove straight home that day, stopping only for gas. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I checked every inch of the truck. No damage, no missing items, but that faint metallic smell still clung to the fabric, even with the windows rolled down most of the way. We were trolling the motor out in a shallow cove on the north end of the lake. Good base spot with plenty of lily pads and deadfall. The evening hung warm, still in the low 70s after sunset. Beer in hand, we sat on the bench seats, lines cast into the water. The sun had dipped below the horizon around 7:15, and by 8, night had fully descended. Glassy water stretched before us, a clear sky studded with stars overhead. An unnatural silence enveloped everything. Carl first pointed out how strange the quiet was. "You hear that?" he asked, gesturing around. Our voices seemed too loud against the dead stillness. Water lapped gently against the boat, but otherwise nothing moved. No crickets, no distant trucks, just complete silence. We sat listening for maybe 5 or 10 minutes when a light appeared through the trees on the lake's east side. It wasn't bright, more a dull amber color, almost like a street lamp, but it was moving, gliding smoothly, left to right above the tree line. No blinking, no strobing, just steady, quiet movement. At first I thought it might be a drone, but it lacked that typical high-pitched hum. It moved perfectly, as if on invisible tracks. Carl stood up slowly, putting his hand on my shoulder. "You seeing that?" he asked. I nodded. We watched the light drift across the treetops for maybe 15 or 20 seconds before it dipped behind the trees and vanished. That night haunted me. The next night, I dreamed about a light, not a shape, not a ship, just a bright white light. Close and soundless, it hung above me. Seconds after we first saw it, the light reappeared across the lake on the west side. Same amber glow, same silent glide. Same height, but something was off. No way anything could cross a mile of dense forest and water that quickly. No sound, no flash, just there and then not. Carl sat down slowly, just staring. I didn't know what to say. We watched it move slower this time, like it was scanning something. Then it stopped completely, suspended above the trees, totally motionless. No sway, no drift, just locked in place like it had frozen. Then it vanished. No fading, no flying away. 1 second present, the next gone. No trail, no noise. We sat in the boat a long time afterwards, silent. We were in the Blue Ridge Mountains during early October, a perfect time to escape and clear my head. I'd taken a week off work, and most people didn't even know I was out here. Midday brought cool, sunny weather with temperatures in the mid-60s. I was hiking a lesser-used trail near Dotson Park, about 6 miles from the trailhead, the kind of path where you might walk all day without seeing another soul. At an overlook where the trees thinned out, I stopped for a quick break. The view stretched across the valley to the next ridge, maybe a mile away. Sitting on a flat rock and scanning the landscape, something caught my eye. A shiny object hung motionless just above the tree line like a piece of chrome, suspended in the air, not wobbling or moving, just hanging there. My first thought was a drone, but it seemed too large and made no sound. No rotors, no movement. Just a small silver dot reflecting sunlight like a perfectly angled mirror. I watched it for what might have been 10 or 30 seconds, hard to tell. When I looked down to grab a protein bar from my pack, the thing vanished. Not moved, completely gone. Scanning the ridge revealed nothing. Then I noticed the silence. Before, the forest had been alive with sound chickadees, distant woodpeckers, the usual background noise you stop hearing after a while. Now, absolutely nothing. No rustling, no insects, just wind. I could hear my own blood pumping. It wasn't that the animals had scattered in fear. They just seemed to have stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. Days later, Carl and I reflected on our strange experience. We suggested heading back after our encounter at the lake. Something peculiar happened when we checked our devices. My watch said 9:22, Carl's showed 10:03. My phone read 10:39. We'd only brought 3 beers, weren't drunk, and the rolling motor ran fine. But somehow, 2 hours had passed without either of us noticing. On the return trip, I kept looking back, half expecting to see the light again. The lake remained dark, no bugs, no sound. At the shore, everything looked normal. Truck there, gear dry, keys in my pocket, but even the truck's clock was off, showing 12:12 with no explanation. We drove home mostly quiet. Carl looked pale. We were both trying to rationalize it. Maybe a drone, maybe something ordinary, but the lake's dead silence before the light appeared and the unexplained time loss kept nagging at us. Carl later mentioned attempting to find the cove during daylight. His GPS wouldn't stabilize, jumping erratically. His compass app spun in slow circles regardless of direction. Me? I haven't been back to that lake since. I stood up, earning slowly, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, breeze, nothing. Something fell off. The woods seemed to hold air breath, an eerie silence, hanging heavy around me. I'm no easily spooked, but his stillness was unsettling. I tried to rationalize his feeling, wondering if I'd imagined his reflection or if he birds were just a king to break. An hour later, I found myself a narrow switchback with a clear view of his ridge, where I'd earlier seen something unusual. I wasn't searching for anything specific, just pausing to catch my breath. Then a strange sound caught my attention. A faint hum, didn't make sense. No power lines, no buildings, no roads nearby, Jew woods. The sound wasn't constant, more like a pressure behind my ears, pulsed every few seconds. I held my breath to check if his sound was coming from me. I remained unchanged, low, barely perceptible, almost like a deep in it is. Scanning his sky revealed nothing. No planes, no contrails, no birds. In fact, I realized I hadn't seen a single bird since he earlier overlooked. No even he ubiquitous crows. My pace quickened, the rail was overgrown in spots, and I nearly missed he Ernoff where his sign had fallen. Backtracking caused me about 15 minutes. Throughout he hum continued, steady now, following me like a persistent headache due behind my skull. Near he parking lot, I encountered a couple hiking in he opposite direction. They looked like serious hikers, fully equipped with packs and wrecking poles. We exchanged brief hells. I almost asked about any strange occurrences, but I decided against it, just wanting a return. As I approached the railhead, he hum vanished. No dramatic ending, just a quiet fade. Suddenly, he would seem to come alive again. A cardinal chirped nearby, and a squirrel darted across he path. The parking lot had only vehicles, my car, and an old Subaru likely belonging a hiking couple. Standing beside my car, I lay, my heart rate say, lep. Though I hadn't run, I felt inexplicably wired. My shirt was damp with sweat despite he cool air. During he drive, back in my rented cabin, my hose kept returning earlier citing the object had been unnaturally shiny. No, like a metallic plane or a dull balloon, more reminiscent of polished glass or chrome. The experience felt strange, and I kept it to myself for a while. I didn't want to sensationalize it or sound crazy. We were driving west on Route 36 outside Decatur, Illinois, on a warm October night. The road stretched endlessly through flat farmland, with only occasional farmhouse lights and our high beams breaking the darkness. It was late, probably around 11 o'clock, and my girlfriend Natalie was dozing off in the passenger seat. As I drove, my eyes wandered across the monotonous landscape of soybean fields, grain silos, and scattered barns. Then something in the field to my right caught my attention. At first, I thought it might be a combine or tower light, but this was different. Low to the ground, at tree height, a pale yellowish-white glow was moving. About the size of a beach ball, it glided smoothly parallel to the car, maybe 50 or 60 yards off the road. No strobing, no blinking, no sound. It wasn't bouncing like a drone would. Instead, it floated perfectly, matching our speed with eerie precision. I nudged Natalie awake. "There's something out here," I said. She sat up, looked out the window, and after a moment asked, "Is that a light?" We slowed down slightly, and the light continued its steady movement alongside us. "Should I pull over?" I asked. She nodded. I eased onto the gravel shoulder and stopped, turning on the hazards. The moment we stopped, the light began to dim. Not abruptly, but gradually, like a flashlight's batteries dying. Natalie grabbed her phone, rolled down the window, and tried to record. But by the time she hit record, nothing remained. Just the dark outline of the field. Curiosity pulled me out of the car, stepping onto the shoulder near the ditch. Something felt strange. The air seemed thick, not cold exactly, but dense like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Darkness surrounded me. The cornfield was unnaturally still. Maybe it was just a drone. Perhaps the silence was mere coincidence. Or maybe I had imagined the entire thing. Natalie's voice cut through my thoughts. "I saw it, right?" she asked, checking her phone. "No video evidence. I've hiked that route 5 or 6 times since, and I've never encountered that kind of absolute silence again, not once." The field stretched out around us, silent, except for the soft rustle of cornstalks and distant cricket sounds. A single dog bark broke the stillness, echoing from a nearby farm before fading away. We sat motionless, listening to the quiet punctuated only by the cooling hood's faint ticking. Nightingale, tracking a late spring storm forming due west of a Canadian river near Hinton, Oklahoma. No, a full supercell system, a cluster of isolated cells, would light up he plains. I'm no a professional storm chaser, but a guy with a decent camera setup and a hobby of spending much time in his ruck. It was around 6:30 in he evening, early June, and he sky was starting to bruise over he southwest. All purples and pale green edges. I parked my ruck on a dirt road running alongside a Carla fence, maybe 10 miles from home. An open field stretched he east, where or wild grass, oddly flat with no reeds or power lines. Perfect. I set up my ripod facing his storm line and started rolling, standing off his side with the remote stills when I saw a strike. The storm moved slowly. Disan Honda rolled low haw my chest, and air smelled sharp. Ozone, dust, damp heat. Every few minutes, a bowl would reach down and ouch somewhere far off. But nothing really close. Abu, 40 minutes in. One strike high he field straight ahead. Maybe a couple 100 yards. Dow I wasn't. Hebrews. Bowl I'd ever seen. A bowl close enough, he sound. High barely a second after he flash. A big crack like a board snapping, followed by a growl seemed to come from under he ground. I startled me. Kept he cameralling. I even said something dumb out loud, like hey, was a good one. When I earned, she was looking past me, her gaze fixed over my shoulder. I spun around and caught a fleeing glimpse, a faint glow hovering low above he field, maybe 5 or 6 feet up, about 100 yards out. I vanished instantly, like a dimmer switch fading black. We sat frozen, an unspoken tension hanging between us. The moment didn't feel threatening by something, watched, waiting. Eventually, I started driving, breaking his silence. Natalie kept glancing back at Hayfield. Minutes later, approaching a county road intersection. Movement caught my eye, something all shifting behind a tree line. Maybe deer, maybe shadows. We said nothing. In Riverton, we stopped for gas. While Natalie used her bathroom, I stretched my legs under a sky blazing with stars. The earlier encounter lingering like a half-remembered dream. We made I.O. Springfield Jews. After midnight checking into a cheap motel near High Highway. Neither of us slept well. I kept waking up every hour, checking he window like I huff. I might be here hovering. We were driving that route when something caught our eye outside the parking lot. We didn't discuss it much in the morning, trying to downplay what we saw like it was just some weird farm equipment or a trick of light. But we both knew it wasn't normal. We haven't driven that route again since. I kept scanning the horizon, half expecting the glow to reappear. It didn't. The storm had lost its structure and the light was fading when I packed up around 8. Back at my rental house in Eleno, I transferred the footage to my laptop while having dinner. That night, I only skimmed through the video, planning to do a proper edit in the morning. When I opened the file the next day, I started examining the best lightning strike frame by frame. The lightning itself was brief, just 5 or 6 frames. But something in the frame just before the flash caught my eye. Initially, I thought it might be a camera glitch. My camera isn't top tier, but it's usually reliable. Zooming in, I saw a distinct shape. Not a light or a smudge, but a dark object. It was disc-shaped, horizontal, slightly tilted, hovering about 20 feet above the grass, right in the center of the frame. I stared at it for a full minute, then rewatched the section. The shape appeared suddenly, one frame of grass and dim sky, then this object followed immediately by lightning. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bird mid-flight, a drone, something on the lens. But nothing matched. No wings, no blur, no rotor blades. Just a flat, dark grey oval with soft edges, almost as if it was absorbing light. Checking time codes and slowing the video down, I confirmed this was the only anomaly. No other sensor errors or strange artifacts existed in the entire recording. I attempted to recreate the shape by adjusting contrast, shadows, and saturation in other video stills, but couldn't replicate it. That night, sleep eluded me. The next morning, I returned to the same road and field stretch. Clear skies, no storms on the radar. Walking to the spot where I believe the lightning struck, I found no dramatic burn marks. Just a small patch of grass that looked oddly flattened, as if something heavy had hovered close to the ground. This happened about 2 years ago when I was home alone in a small suburban Cleveland neighborhood, the kind of quiet street where you know your neighbors but not really. The streets were quiet, typical of our small neighborhood filled with families and retired folks. Nothing exciting ever happens here. At least that's what I thought. 2 months ago I went storm chasing and discovered something strange in a field. A wide circle about 8 or 10 feet across, with grass pressed down in a shallow depression. The edges weren't sharp, but definitely noticeable. No scorch marks, no smell, just an odd shape. I walked the field for an hour searching for anything that might explain it. Metal, wires, some sign of what caused this pattern. Nothing. No footprints except my own. No tire tracks, no equipment signs. On the way back to my truck, I felt a peculiar sensation. Not exactly watched, but like I'd forgotten something. That nagging nervous weight in your gut, similar to leaving home and feeling like the stove might be on. I sat in the cab for a while, staring out at the field. When I got home, I showed the frame to my brother, who knows more about camera technology than I do. I didn't reveal my thoughts, just asked if he could explain what he saw. He studied it and said it didn't look like any digital artifact he recognized. Instead, he described it as looking inserted, not through editing, but like something actually in the scene that the camera caught for a split second. Close to midnight, I first noticed a low humming, barely audible at first, like a distant transformer or generator buzz. I was sitting on the couch watching a late-night show when I heard it. The sound wasn't steady. It pulsed like a slow vibration. I paused the show and listened, wondering if it was just my imagination or perhaps the heating system. Then the street lights caught my attention. This wasn't a typical electrical glitch, but something deliberate. Each light blinked in a specific sequence. 2 blinks near my house, 3 down the block, 1 across the street. A pattern that felt more like communication than random malfunction. I asked about a possible lightning flash creating a visual echo, but my brother shook his head. Not without light. This was a dark shape. I haven't gone storm chasing since. The footage remains, sitting in a desktop folder, labeled Hinton Field. Sometimes at night, in complete silence, I think about how this thing appeared in just one frame, visible for 1/100th of a second like something waiting, briefly illuminated by lightning, and then gone. The street was silent, completely still. My calls went unanswered, hanging in the empty air. A persistent, mechanical hum vibrated through the cold night, its origin impossible to pinpoint. I checked the breaker box, but everything appeared normal. When I tried calling the utility company, the phone rang endlessly without response. Something felt fundamentally off. Over the next few days, I began questioning my experience. I asked my neighbors, starting with Karen across the street, about that strange night. Their confused looks made me doubt my own perception. Each conversation chipped away at my confidence. Yet every night I found myself watching. Street lights signaled in cryptic patterns, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, never repeating exactly, always shifting, always just on the edge of comprehension. The constant background hum seemed to hint at something beyond understanding. Was I imagining it all? Was there something happening that only I could detect? These questions lingered as mysteriously as the flickering lights themselves. I'd been tracking these occurrences for months, carefully noting their unpredictable nature. The vibrations would last anywhere from 5 minutes to nearly an hour, with no discernible trigger or pattern. About a month into these events, everything intensified dramatically. Lying in bed, I heard the humming grow stronger than ever before. Looking out the window, the streetlights pulsed in perfect unison, like a synchronized heartbeat. Gradually, each bulb went dark, leaving empty poles standing silently. I stood frozen. Suddenly, the hum cut out completely, as if someone had flipped a switch. My phone had no signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi. The entire block seemed disconnected from the world. My car radio produced only static. Darkness and silence surrounded me. I desperately wanted to contact someone, anyone, but nothing worked. My phone showed a full battery, yet remained utterly useless. 9. Here's the rewritten version. My world had gone silent. Nothing moved. Even time itself seemed suspended, with my clock frozen in place. An overwhelming sense of isolation crept over me. After what felt like an eternity, streetlights began to awaken, flickering back to life one by one. The electrical hum returned, but weaker this time. Slowly, signals restored and clocks resumed their rhythm. When I contacted the utility company, a recording claimed no outages had been reported. That night, sleep was impossible. Something felt fundamentally wrong, as if I were under observation or part of some strange experiment. Though I had no proof, I stopped sharing these experiences. People invariably dismissed my stories or quickly changed the subject, treating me as if I were losing my grip on reality. Over the next 6 months, strange occurrences continued sporadically. Sometimes the flickering and humming were frequent. Sometimes they vanished for weeks. No one else on the street seemed to notice. I even approached local police about potential unusual light or sound reports, but they treated me like I was wasting their time. Occasionally, while driving home at night, I'd catch glimpses of similar flickering streetlights on other blocks, fleeting, mysterious moments that reinforced my sense that something unusual was happening. In late June, Mark and I were hiking through a canyon, desperately seeking a weekend escape. 2 hours into our trek, we discovered the perfect campsite. A flat ledge halfway up the canyon wall overlooking a dry wash. The day was scorching, but the night promised comfortable sleeping temperatures. Our plan was simple: hike in Friday morning, camp Friday night, return Saturday afternoon. We carried standard hiking gear, tents, food, water, and firewood gathered along the way. The trail was dusty and narrow, but not overly challenging. Mark's humor kept our spirits high, and I tried to push work thoughts from my mind. By mid-afternoon, we'd established our spot and set up camp. We started a fire and watched the canyon walls transform colors as the sun moved westward. The silence felt different, not empty, but alive, as if the land itself was breathing. Around 9 p.m., we relaxed on our sleeping pads. The fire low, staring up at a Milky Way impossible to see in the city. Suddenly, I heard it. Faint, muffled voices like a group talking softly. At first, I thought Mark was speaking. "Hey, are you talking?" I asked. He was puzzled. "No, ma'am." "What?" The sound was bizarre, like voices underwater or behind a thick wall. The silence crept in first during our night in the canyon, with the fire dying down and casting long shadows. Suddenly, muffled voices emerged, not clear conversations, but a jumbled blend of distant sounds lasting maybe 5 or 6 seconds before vanishing completely. I whispered to Mark, "Did you hear that?" His pale face and nervous laugh told me he was more unsettled than he wanted to admit. Looking up, I expected to see campers or some source of the sound, but saw only stars and sky. The noise wasn't wind or animal sounds, and it seemed to be directly above us, clear and distinct. No flashlights, no movement, just an unexplained presence that made me question everything about this quiet place. Later that night, I discovered my emergency weather radio was completely dead. Its screen black no matter how many times I tried switching it on and off. Mark's phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual, but the radio always went. Morning brought normality back. Sunlight warmed the canyon, and birds sang their usual songs. We packed up and started hiking out, but Mark kept looking over his shoulder like we were being watched. The return trip was unusually silent. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe canyon acoustics were playing tricks, or we were just tired. This wasn't my first weird experience. Just weeks earlier, I'd been working a late-night pizza delivery shift outside Portland. It was early October, with that damp chill that seems to penetrate everything. The suburban streets were empty, lined with maple trees dropping leaves. To this day, I can't explain what we heard. Was it some atmospheric phenomenon, distant wildlife, hidden people, or something else entirely? It remains a mystery, the only unexplained sound I've ever encountered. Those voices from the night before still linger, feeling distinctly out of place. No, late at night I was driving my usual delivery route, the neighborhood quiet and still. Porch lights were out, and houses sat back on large lots. About halfway down the block, something caught my attention, a small, dark shape hovering near the road's edge. At first I thought it might be a drone, maybe some kid playing around after dark. I slowed the car and watched carefully. The object remained completely motionless, unlike any drone I'd encountered before. No blinking lights, no movement. I rolled down the window and cut the radio, hoping to hear if it made any sound. Silence, total and absolute. For about 20 seconds, it just hung there. Then it began rotating, slowly, with an eerily smooth and precise movement. Not like a drone bobbing in the wind, but something deliberate, almost as if it was scanning the area. I tried to convince myself it was some new drone model, but something felt off. Without warning, it shot straight up vertically, like someone had pressed a supernatural fast-forward button. No sound, no buzzing, just a clean, impossible ascent that defied everything I knew about flying objects. In an instant, it vanished into a thin layer of wispy clouds. One moment present, the next completely gone. Strange occurrences began to follow. Headlights would appear behind me, but when I looked back, the road was empty. At home, I told my roommate Dan, who just laughed it off. That night, a faint humming came through the apartment walls. Each time I investigated, nothing was out of place. Doors and windows remained locked tight. Over the next few days, small oddities emerged. A kitchen drawer slightly open when I was certain I'd closed it. A book mysteriously repositioned on the shelf. Nothing suggested a break-in, but enough to make me constantly glance over my shoulder, wondering what was really going on. Weeks later, while flying a small single-engine Cessna late one night in July, I experienced something similar. Cruising westbound over Oregon's outskirts at about 1,500 feet, the sky was clear, and the day's heat still lingered in the cabin. Just another routine night flight to keep my license current. Around 11:15 p.m., something caught my eye out the left window. At first, I thought it was another plane, but something felt off. Something dark and almost completely black, without navigation lights or strobes. No sound, the kind of silence that stands out when everything else seems normal. I shifted my gaze to get a better look. The object was about 300 yards away, flying alongside me and matching my speed perfectly. What really caught my attention was its movement. This wasn't a normal aircraft. The thing tilted sharply, banking into turns no regular plane could manage. Its motion was smooth and steady, almost as if it was slipping through the air on its own terms. I checked my instruments, triple-checking everything. Airspeed, altitude, all normal. No erratic readings, no turbulence. When I looked back, the shape was still there, still moving with me. I tried to radio it, Cessna N8453P to unknown traffic. Identify yourself. I hit the transmit button 3 times but got nothing. No call sign, no response, not even static. Then, in that moment of expectation, it disappeared. 1 second it was here, the next gone. No fading, no flying off into the distance. Just vanished like it never existed. The cockpit felt different. The quiet seemed heavier, the air thicker. I double-checked everything. Windows, instruments, fuel gauge, all normal. My heart was racing, but I stayed calm. I radioed Portland Approach to report the sighting. They confirmed no other traffic on radar, no unidentified objects. When I gave them my position again and asked about anything unusual, they said I must have imagined it. But I know what I saw that night. Definitely not a drone. Back home in Riverside, I was sorting through drone files from our week-long field survey in the Mojave, cataloging desert tortoise habitats around the Amboy crater. The landscape was nothing but heat and dust miles from any highway. Most of the footage was routine, just boring flyover shots. But one clip made me stop. Everything was unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, not a single rabbit crossing the rocks. Recorded around 6:40 a.m., just as the sun was starting to stretch shadows thin. While skipping through 5-second jumps, something caught my eye. A shadow glided across the rocks from left to right. It was big, perfectly round, smooth as glass, like a pitch-black spotlight, moving slowly, maybe 10 feet every second, completely silent. No objects in the sky, nothing above it. I paused, scrolled back, played again. A perfect circle about 20 feet wide sliding across the landscape. The drone footage haunted me. A shadow had passed behind a boulder, partially disappearing, and then reappearing on the other side. It seemed to have depth, interacting with the terrain in a way that didn't make sense. I needed to rule out technical issues, so I pulled the drone from its case and checked for scratches or lens problems. Nothing seemed out of order. I ran the footage through another program, but the anomaly remained. I've seen weird lens flares and digital glitches before, but this was no digital artifact. It was something else entirely. This reminded me of other strange encounters. Pilots at my local flying club had shared similar stories. One described a dark shape moving in ways nothing else could. Another mentioned unexplained radio static during a night flight. During my own flights, I sometimes catch glimpses of something moving at impossible angles, always just at the edge of the lights, always silent. The GPS timestamp confirmed it was during a solo flight, with no other team members around. I initially thought it might be a lens issue. I reported the incident to the FAA after my initial sighting. They brushed it off with standard explanations about optical illusions and atmospheric conditions. But I can't shake the feeling that something is out here watching. The landscape. I didn't match the sun's angle or shape. This wasn't a drone. I know our shadows, and his was different. The next day I called Heather, who managed the flight logs, careful not to reveal my growing unease. I casually asked if she remembered any area that morning. She confirmed the airspace was clear, no scheduled passes and no chance of random traffic. We were completely isolated, surrounded only by tortoises and sand. That night I watched the entire clip carefully. A faint crackling noise caught my attention, like distant radio static, barely audible through the drone's mediocre microphone. The sound lasted just a second or two, cutting out precisely when the shadow vanished. Something felt off. 2 days later, I drove back alone. The GPS indicated the drone's position over a dry wash about 3 miles east of the crater. By mid-morning, I had hiked to the exact spot from the footage. The boulder remained, the wash unchanged. I walked the ground where the shadow had moved, finding no burn marks, impressions, or tracks. The silence struck me as unnatural. Desert quiet is one thing, but this was different. No wind, no insects, no distant plane hum. I felt like sound itself had been swallowed. Weeks of odd drone footage had been eating away at me. It started with a mysterious video that my brother dismissed without a second glance. During a Barstow trip, I spotted something unsettling. A brief camera stutter and a round shadow sweeping across the top left corner, about 5 feet wide, vanishing before the drone completed its pass. Checking the logs revealed no scheduled air traffic or other drones. This flight was over 60 miles from a previous one with a different team. Curiosity drove me to review older footage from months earlier. 2 additional clips caught my attention, one from Arizona, another near Ridgecrest, both featuring strange audio static and sudden camera movements. Silent mornings, brief audio crackles, and tiny gimbal shifts became a pattern. But I kept these observations to myself. In my line of work, reporting mysterious desert shadows would damage my professional credibility. This was how I paid rent, after all. Then last week, everything changed. Testing a thermal rig near Goffs on a scorching afternoon with 2 grad students, I launched a final drone flight to capture overhead imagery before the light deteriorated. 3 minutes in, the video feed cut to black for 2 seconds before returning. The drone showed no errors and maintained its position. That evening, reviewing the footage revealed something extraordinary. The black frame wasn't empty. A dark dome filled almost the entire screen, with faint terrain edges visible around its perimeter. Despite the drone's consistent flight path, it appeared to have passed beneath something in what should have been open sky. Earlier, I had experienced an eerie silence where sound itself had been muted. I paced, searching for any explanation, tried to convince myself it was just a technical glitch. A brief crackle from the south, like a walkie-talkie switching on for half a second, broke the silence. I called out, "Nothing." I waited. Still nothing. As I started walking toward the sound, a strange pressure built in my chest. The air felt heavy, wrong. Something told me to stop. I turned back to the truck, leaving whatever mystery lingered here unresolved. The static continued to whisper of something unknown, something just beyond perception. Well, we were out on the lake late that night, just me and Jake, doing what we usually did on weekends when we wanted to escape everything. Stars shone so brightly they seemed almost close enough to touch, and the water looked like glass, perfectly still and smooth. The only sounds were the occasional plop of a bobber and the soft creaking of our little motorboat. Jake went quiet, staring out over the water behind us. I followed his gaze, wondering if he'd spotted something. Then we heard it. A sudden heavy splash right behind us. But something was strange. There were no ripples, no movement. The surface remained perfectly smooth, as if the water had made a sound without actually moving. It didn't make sense, Jake asked. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, feeling uneasy. We stayed still, expecting something to break the water's surface. Then a low, steady droning sound emerged from beneath the boat. This wasn't like any engine noise or typical nature sounds. It was deep, almost a vibration you could feel through your bones. Constant and unchanging. We sat in silence, just listening. The droning continued for several minutes. Our small flashlights swept the area, scanning the water for any sign of movement, but we saw nothing. After about 5 minutes, the sound abruptly stopped. No gradual fade, just complete silence. The sudden quiet felt even more unsettling. Without discussing why, I told Jake we needed to head back. Something felt off. As Jake started the motor, the water around us remained unnaturally still. No ripples, no disturbance. Since that night, I haven't flown. I told the team it was an equipment malfunction that needed recalibration. But the truth is, I still don't understand what I'm seeing. Shadows that move without light, appearing where nothing exists. They're showing up more frequently now. Always in the middle of nowhere, always when it's quiet, always watching from above. They buzzed for exactly 1.8 seconds, then vanished. The lake was pitch black that night, with the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Not a single splash or movement disturbed the surface. Jake broke the silence. asking if I sensed something strange, as if we were being watched. I struggled to articulate the sensation. It wasn't pure fear, but more like something lurking just beneath the surface, wanting neither to be noticed nor completely ignored. Midway back to shore, the boat's GPS screen suddenly flickered and went blank for a few seconds. My unease intensified with this unexplained glitch. Stepping onto the dock felt like a relief. Familiar wooden planks creaked beneath our feet, and moonlight danced across the water's surface. Everything seemed normal again. We packed up quietly, avoiding discussion of our unsettling experience. During the drive home, I repeatedly checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. Nothing was there. That night, sleep eluded me. The low drone and mysterious splash kept replaying in my mind, as if the lake continued to wait just outside. Late one October night, I was returning to Kingman from Flagstaff after spending more time than planned at my cousin's kid's birthday. After helping clean up and chatting with my uncle, I didn't leave until almost 11 o'clock. The drive was familiar, just under 2 hours, mostly along I-40 through the desert with hardly any traffic. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary during the trip. A dry, cool night with a moon hanging overhead. My truck's dash cam, a VFO model with front and rear views, was running as always. I'd installed it months earlier after a previous incident with someone running a red light. Between Seligman and Ashfork, I passed a couple of semis, but otherwise the road remained empty. An old Raymond Chandler audiobook played softly, and a Gatorade sat in the cup holder. The strangest part didn't reveal itself until I got home. Parking in the driveway and killing the engine, I gathered my things from the passenger seat. As usual, I glanced at the dash cam when shutting off the truck. Something was off. The screen was frozen on a single frame. Black road, starry sky, with a timestamp reading 12:381, while my truck's clock showed 12:40. This discrepancy bothered me. I haven't been back to that part of the lake since, and I'm not sure I want to. Truck's GPS-synced clock should have lined up perfectly that morning. I tapped the screen, unplugged and replugged the device, and rebooted normally before starting to record again with no apparent issues. Transferring the SD card to my laptop, I began investigating the files. They save in 3-minute segments, and I found the last complete clip ending at 12:38, followed by an unusual partial file just 2 seconds long. Opening the file showed a typical view, a dark highway, center lines, desert brush, and stars overhead with no other headlights. But the last frame was bizarre. Everything went completely black, not just the road or dashcam view, but the sky itself. The stars simply blinked out in a single frame. Using various video tools, I meticulously reviewed the footage. The desert road stretched endlessly, with crystal clear skies and dozens of stars visible in every frame, until suddenly they weren't. The last frame showed nothing, just blackness. Then silence. The next file started at 12:41, as if 2 minutes had vanished without a trace. The highway looked identical, with no other vehicles and stars back in their usual places. Something felt off. The GPS log confirmed my suspicions. During those missing minutes, I'd supposedly traveled just 0.1 miles, about 500 feet, with zero recorded speed, like the system had momentarily lost me and then picked me up slightly ahead with no record of movement. Everything else appeared completely normal. No glitches, no missing. Rewatching the clips repeatedly, I searched for anything unusual. That's when I noticed a strange shimmer in the upper right corner of the front camera around 12:35, small, maybe thumb-sized. It wobbled slightly like a bug crawling across a dirty windshield, but it wasn't on the lens, it was in the sky. The stars behind it seemed to blur as it passed, semi-transparent and odd. The rear camera held another peculiarity. At 12:37, a single frame revealed a faint halo-shaped glow at the top center, not bright, just a subtle smudge that didn't match any vehicle lights. Then it vanished. I kept quiet about it for days. What could I even say? Eventually I showed my neighbor Danny, who used to work for, well, that's another story. We set out hiking around 10 o'clock in the morning, a day trip with Jason, Liz, Mark, and me. The route was barely a trail. We parked off a dirt road near Newberry Springs, heading into the vast Mojave landscape. Sun-baked rocks and dry washes wound through low hills, offering no shade. Our gear was minimal: water, jerky, and a few Cliff Bars. Mark carried an old Nikon camera and Liz brought her small drone. Escaping the city felt good. By noon, the heat became brutal, no wind, almost complete silence, except for our boots crunching and the occasional fly buzzing. An old truck shell from the 60s, half buried in sand, caught our attention. Liz snapped pictures, while Jason joked it looked like it had been dropped from the sky. Reaching the ridge around 5 or 5:30, the sun was dropping low. We rested, shared our remaining food, and watched the hills darken. Around 6 o'clock, I checked my phone, no service, but the GPS still worked. I'd marked our truck's location. Later, I showed the dashcam footage to a friend at AOT. You watched carefully and only asked, "Did you feel anything when it happened?" No, nothing seemed unusual during the drive. My audiobook played continuously, with no strange sounds, lights, or radio static. The only odd thing was the dashcam clip. When I tried uploading it to a car tech forum, the file wouldn't load properly. Compressing it turned the last frame into corrupted green static. A screen recording attempt showed a solid black frame, as if something had been cut. The original played fine on my laptop, so I saved it on multiple drives and occasionally review it frame by frame. We were heading back, thinking we had enough daylight when the light appeared. At first, it seemed like a star, but something was off. Too low, too bright, and completely silent, just hovering about 100 feet up. A pale white orb with no discernible shape. We all stared, trying to make sense of it. Then it started moving, slow, smooth, almost gliding without effort. It drifted over the ridge and stopped again. No sound, not even the faint hum of a drone or helicopter. Liz tried to film it, but her phone was dead. I checked mine, black screen. Jason's phone was out too, and Mark's camera wouldn't turn on. We watched as the light moved again, this time faster, then suddenly vanished, not behind a cloud, just gone. The next thing I remember, we were walking downhill. Jason led with Liz and Mark behind. Something felt strange. Darkness settled around us more intensely than expected, as if we'd missed sunset entirely. My phone flickered to life, showing 8:12 p.m. with 47% battery. The GPS revealed we'd accidentally drifted half a mile off our intended path. No one could agree on what happened during the last hour. We tried to piece together our memories. Mark thought we started walking right away, but Liz wasn't certain. We couldn't remember packing up or seeing the sunset. After a brief debate, we decided to continue moving. The truck wasn't far, and we wanted to leave. 2 days later, we met at a Barstow diner to compare notes. Something felt off. We were all exhausted, not exactly sick, but strangely drained. Jason mentioned hearing a high-pitched hum at night. Liz's smartwatch had stopped syncing with her phone. Mark began experiencing unusual nosebleeds. I kept waking up precisely at 2:17 a.m. every night for a week. Our car had been acting strange that day. The dome light still worked. We had to jump-start it using Mark's jumper pack before leaving quickly. Later, I discovered something peculiar in my phone's GPS history. There was a gap between 6:08 and 7:55, where the trail line inexplicably stopped and then resumed further down the ridge. When I reviewed the health data, steps and elevation, it appeared as if we hadn't moved at all during that time. No movement, no heart rate changes. Liz claimed she'd filmed something before her phone died, but the video was gone. Just a corrupted file that wouldn't open. Mark's camera contained a single photo, a white blur he didn't remember taking. Eventually, things returned to normal. Phones worked. Cameras worked. We stopped discussing the incident, not because we forgot, but because we couldn't explain what happened. None of us have returned to the Mojave since. I was driving west on Highway 95 about 30 miles south of Tonopah, just past midnight. I'd left Ellie after a late dinner with my cousin, planning to stop in Bay for the night. The road was quiet, with no other cars for miles. Only dashboard lights and high beams illuminated the cracked black top. I knew this route well from years of running deliveries, sometimes sleeping in my truck. That stretch near the test range always felt eerie, No desert nights can swallow you whole. Miles stretch endlessly between gas stations, with nothing but the hum of tires and a crackling radio for company. That's how it was when I first saw them. 3 white lights hung in the sky, brighter than stars, almost perfectly positioned in a triangle. At first, I figured they were military aircraft, not unusual in this region, but something felt off. They moved with an unnatural precision, maintaining equal spacing without a single waver or blink. I killed the radio and cracked the window. No engine noise, just wind and pavement. These lights moved differently from any aircraft I'd seen. No drifting, no wobbling, just absolute stillness. For at least 5 minutes, they tracked roughly parallel to the road. Curious, I slowed down and eventually pulled over. Complete silence surrounded me when I stepped out of the truck. The lights seemed lower now. Then, without warning, they split up, each darting in a different direction so fast I could barely track them. One left, one up, one straight back. Instantaneous displacement, no curves. Just as quickly they vanished. When I turned back toward the truck, they had returned, same triangle, same position, as if nothing happened. More unsettling was that I hadn't seen them return. They were simply there. I drove, not speeding, but wanting distance. The lights tracked me, stationary, yet present. Then they blinked off, not a gradual fade, but an instant shutdown, like a switch flipped. 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset. It flickered to 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, as if I'd just started driving. I'm Aaron Klee, 62 years old now. Most of my life was spent near Anderson, Alaska, working radar maintenance for the Air Force at Clear Station. I was stationed there on and off from 1995 to 2017, with my last 3 years in civilian support. I've spent most of my life right here, and people often wonder why I'm so cautious. They ask about locking my truck in the driveway or why I avoid being outside after dark. But it's not paranoia. I'm not worried about something jumping out of the woods. Something just doesn't feel right anymore, not since that last week at Clear Station. It was October 2017 when I gave my notice. My wife had already retired, and we wanted to move closer to Fairbanks to be near the grandkids. I had 2 weeks left, mostly doing equipment checks and closing out service logs. The station sits in a remote location, just a massive radar dome, some support buildings, and endless tundra. That time of year, darkness comes quickly. The sun wouldn't rise until after 9, and night fell by 5. I worked the swing shift from 2 to 10 p.m. Our crew was small. Me, Marquez, and a new guy named Dwyer, who'd transferred from Offutt. We managed maintenance on transmitter systems and monitored diagnostics from the command building. Strange things started happening on a Tuesday. Marquez and I were in the power control room checking battery arrays when everything flickered around 7:30. It wasn't just the lights. The entire system dimmed for a split second, like during a brownout. Then everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. I drove to the motel around 1:30, checking in across from the gas station. The desk clerk noted I looked pale, but I brushed it off. In my room, I sat with the TV muted, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it felt restless. The next day, I turned on the truck, something I don't usually do while driving. Logs showed no power interruption, and backup systems hadn't triggered. I called operations, who confirmed everything was normal. I chalked it up to a software glitch and moved on. But then it happened again, a brief flicker, barely a second long. This time, a radar diagnostic panel froze and needed a manual reboot about 20 minutes later. Marquez and I exchanged a knowing look, but worked silently. In our environment, you don't raise alarms without solid reason. We logged the events, carefully noting timestamps and the lack of system alerts. I was doing a routine physical check just after 9, bundled in my parka with a flashlight and clipboard. About 20 yards from the structure, something in the snow caught my eye. It wasn't fresh snow, just a light dusting, but the ice was soft enough to hold tracks. These weren't normal animal prints. They were strange. Long, narrow, with a curved shape like 2 elongated commas side by side. When I leaned down for a closer look, I realized the tracks didn't match any animal I knew from this area. Not moose, fox, or rabbit. The depressions were shallow, forming a tight, almost perfectly spaced zigzag line that curved around the structure's corner and out of view. For reasons I can't explain, I didn't follow them. I completed the inspection and returned inside without mentioning it. Thursday brought another odd occurrence. 2 exterior cameras went dark around 6:42 p.m., almost simultaneously. One faced the northeast field, the other mounted on an old, unused tower. Strangely, they didn't go offline. The feed continued, just black, as if the cameras were functioning but seeing nothing. Marquez and I tried remote resets. When that failed, we sent Dwyer out to investigate. He returned after 10 minutes, looking unsettled. Both cameras were fine, he said. No frost, no damage, no obstructions. He kept repeating how clean the lenses were. That night, I barely slept. My wife asked what was wrong, and I told her I was just stressed about wrapping things up. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the real reason. Something felt off, and I couldn't put my finger on it. The air itself seemed different. It wasn't just quiet outside. I felt hollow, empty in a way that made me uneasy. I'd been out here twice before, and each time something felt strange. No wind, no equipment hum, just complete silence. Friday was my last shift, and I almost didn't go in. Part of me wanted to call out sick, but I didn't want to end my job that way. So I drove up one more time, arriving after dark. I sat in my truck, staring at the sky. Nothing seemed unusual, just the same stars I'd seen countless times before. Inside the station, things were quiet. Dwyer was in the diagnostic room watching the monitors and nodded when I arrived. As I glanced at the screen, something caught my eye. On one of the live feeds beyond the fencing, a faint light flickered. It wasn't steady, more like a slow, rhythmic pulse against the snow, white and dull, blinking twice, then pausing. I leaned closer, and it stopped. I asked Dwyer how long it had been happening. "A few minutes," he said. Stars hung overhead, and my boat lantern cut through the darkness. My border collie mix, Benny, usually curled up quietly at my feet. Around midnight, while reeling in my line, something strange caught my eye. A cluster of pale lights hovered just above the lake's surface, maybe 20 or 30 feet from my boat. These weren't typical boat lights or lanterns. They were soft, diffuse, and strangely didn't reflect on the water's surface. Instead, they seemed to vanish into the lake as if the surface swallowed them whole. The lights remained perfectly still, even though a steady breeze was barely rippling the water. Benny stood unusually, lifting his head and growling softly. Not his typical behavior. Half-jokingly, I called out, "Hey, you folks lost or something?" No response came. The color was a pale blue-white, eerily reminiscent of old glow sticks or massive bioluminescent bugs, but too large and steady to be either. I considered paddling closer to investigate, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The lights seemed to be watching, yet simultaneously trying to remain undetected. Later, back at work, I couldn't shake that same feeling. I checked all systems, but everything looked normal. No alerts, no surges, clean logs. Marquez never showed up that night. He texted just before 6:30, saying he wasn't feeling well. I left an hour early, packed my gear, signed out, and drove home. The next morning, I called my supervisor and told him I wouldn't be coming back for my final day. I officially retired the following week. Now I live near North Pole, close to my grandkids. I keep things simple. At night, I never go out unless absolutely necessary. And when I do, I always look up first. It's just a habit now. I won't return to that lake, not even during the day. I've never spoken to Marquez or Dwyer since. I heard Dwyer didn't stay long. Someone told me he transferred out by spring. And that strange light? I never found out what it was. Not something felt off that night on the lake. The water was unnaturally still, like an invisible force was holding it in place. I'd pulled out my phone to record what was happening, but the battery was completely dead. Strange, since I hadn't used it much that day. My dog Benny was tense, staring hard at pale lights hovering just above the water's surface. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe some unusual fishing equipment or floating flares. But no buoys create lights this steady, and flares would drift with the wind. For about 15 minutes, these lights hung completely motionless. Then they started fading slowly, like someone turning down a dimmer switch. One moment they were there, pale and strange, and the next complete darkness. Benny relaxed and lay down, but I felt cold despite the mild air. On our way back to the dock, I kept glancing back, half expecting the lights to reappear. Nothing did. The night returned to normal, with water lapping and frogs calling. The next day, I asked other local fishermen about what I'd seen. No one reported anything unusual. I checked my phone's battery history, hoping for an explanation, but everything looked normal. I should have had plenty of charge left. Since that night, I've avoided that spot on the lake. Benny and I still fish during the day, but something about that experience doesn't sit right. It was quite still, like a secret just out of understanding. Not a boat, not fishing lights, something else entirely. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. But Benny's weariness tells me something real happened that night. The cameras never came back online after that night. They were eventually replaced, but no one ever discovered what caused their failure. And me, I'm content not knowing what might still be out here. Now, at the end of the cul-de-sac, something felt different. My dog Baxter was acting strange, more alert than usual. 3 bright lights suddenly appeared in the sky, hanging motionless and forming a perfect triangle. Unlike typical lights, these had a soft, almost living glow that seemed to pulse with an internal energy. They were unnaturally still, suspended in the pre-dawn darkness. Baxter went completely rigid beside me. His ears were pressed flat against his head, and he trembled, not from cold, but from a deep, unexplained fear. He didn't try to run, which was unusual. The air felt heavy, thick with an invisible tension that made the quiet street feel wrong. I scanned the empty neighborhood. No cars, no people, just a faint rustling of leaves in a barely perceptible breeze. Baxter's eyes remained fixed on the sky, wide and unblinking. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Could it be a reflection? A new type of drone? A radio tower? But squinting into the blackness revealed nothing behind the lights. They simply existed. After what seemed like an eternity, the lights began to fade. Slowly, they dissolved into the night, as if someone was turning down a dimmer switch. Everything returned to normal, except Baxter seemed fundamentally changed. He'd never behaved like this before, especially not near the water's edge after dark. The street felt different after the lights vanished. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the world was holding its breath. Baxter looked up at me, confused, as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. I unclenched my fingers on his leash and gave him a gentle squeeze. I haven't told anyone about this. Not really. People say you should call the cops or the news about weird lights, but this wasn't like that. It was quieter, stranger. I'm still trying to figure out what it was, but I don't have answers. Just a dog that wouldn't move and 3 lights in a perfect triangle hanging silently above a neighborhood. Not yet awake, just another routine flight. A short night hop from Salt Lake City to Winnemucca. Night during a routine night flight in my trusty Cessna 182. Everything seemed normal. I was cruising at 9,500 feet with clear visibility and a low moon. Around 10:15 p.m., about 25 minutes from the Nevada line, something caught my attention. A faint glow to my right initially looked like a ground light or vehicle, but it was too high up. Leaning closer to the window, I spotted 3 dim white lights arranged vertically, maybe 10 or 15 miles away. They weren't moving horizontally, just slowly rising in a perfectly straight line. I double-checked my chart with the map light. Nothing was out there, no towers, no airfields, no controlled airspace. At first, I thought they might be reflections or stars, but they were too low. The light's spacing remained consistent, even as I banked to get a better view. I radioed Salt Lake Center, November 7, 85, Mike Romeo, checking in. I have 3 vertically stacked lights ascending slowly at my 10, maybe 15 degrees off nose left. Their response was immediate. Negative. You're the only radar return in that sector. Something felt off. Not fear, exactly, but an unsettling sense that what I was seeing shouldn't exist. The lights were dim and steady, white dots with no strobes or navigation lights. Suddenly a fourth light appeared below them, fading in without any sudden flare. I contacted Salt Lake again. Are you sure there are no tower lights or weather balloons? These are bright and climbing. Their response was definitive. Negative, Mike Romeo. You're clear. No weather balloons in this region tonight. No scheduled launches. The lights had stopped rising, hanging about 5,000 feet above me, too close to be stars. As I banked slightly right to keep them in view, the entire vertical column shifted horizontally to the west, sliding smoothly like it was on glass. No change in spacing, no rotation, just a perfect lateral drift. Salt Lake, I've got visual contact with 4 unidentified lights moving laterally, no strobes, no sound, no visible aircraft body. Am I really the only one out here? After a longer pause, they responded, 785 Mike Romeo. We're painting only you in that airspace. Do you wish to declare an emergency? I simply said no and continued flying. The lights held their new position for about a minute before inexplicably beginning to rise again. No routine night flight had taken an unexpected turn. The lights were unlike anything I'd seen before. They shot straight up, vanishing into the cloudless sky within seconds. Completely gone, leaving only empty darkness behind. I stared at the spot for a long time, sensing something waiting, silent. Without responding, I continued my landing just after 11:30. The hangar was dark and windless, completely empty. I secured the plane, got in my truck, and drove directly to the motel without touching my gear. Strange details emerged the next morning. My Solar Casio watch was 10 minutes behind, something it never does. My backup headset mic was mysteriously tucked under the seat, partially unplugged. The knee board I always clipped to my leg during flight now sat on the passenger floor. These weren't impossible occurrences, but they felt distinctly out of place. I remembered checking my time before seeing those lights, clipping the board to my knee, coiling my headset cord as usual. Something had shifted. I've only shared this with one trusted pilot who didn't mock me or offer explanations. He simply listened, nodded, and mentioned seeing similar strange lights in that area multiple times. Since then, I haven't flown that route at night again. Our family camping trip in late August near Black Rock Desert was meant to be different. Just north of Reno, we sought a more remote experience than typical campgrounds. Daytime heat was dry and bearable, with nights cooling quickly. Heather and I brought our kids, Ellie and Josh, finding a perfect spot near a dry lake bed, close enough to stargaze without light interference. No cell service, no other campers, the nearest paved road 40 minutes away. Our campsite nestled in a sandy dip, surrounded by sagebrush, anchored with rocks. A 6-person dome tent, 2 folding tables, and a pop-up shade completed our setup. The first nights were idyllic. Vast skies, peaceful evenings occasionally punctuated by distant coyote calls. We cooked on the camp stove, roasted marshmallows, played cards, a classic family camping experience. The night had settled in quietly after dinner with a wind that wasn't fierce, just strong enough to make the tent walls flex. We tightened the guidelines before bed, listening to a strange sound rushing over the lake bed, a low, constant hum that seemed to rise from the terrain's flat surface. Not at 10:17, Heather and I settled into our tent with the kids positioned on either side. Stars peeked through the mesh overhead, and I remember checking my watch before falling asleep. Later, I awakened smoothly, without grogginess or stiffness. Heather and the children remained asleep, and everything inside the tent appeared unchanged. Yet something felt wrong. When I sat up and examined our surroundings, I noticed the tent's main zipper was fully closed, pull tabs tucked outside from the interior opening. This wasn't how we'd left it. We always zipped up from inside before sleeping. My watch beside my sleeping bag read 2:46 a.m. I initially thought the wind might have caused this, but it had completely stopped. No sound, no movement, just dead stillness. A strange sense suggested it was earlier, maybe around 12:30 or 1. I turned on the lantern, creating a soft glow. Heather stirred and asked what was wrong. Unsettlingly, When we checked our watches and the kids' watches, each showed exactly 2:46 a.m. Despite being purchased separately, the tent entrance had strange scuff marks in the dust, faint impressions that didn't match our footprints. Stepping outside, I found the moonlight low and orange, casting an odd flat glow. Something was fundamentally wrong with the shadows. Our camp stove, surrounding brush, even my own hand, none cast shadows. The absolute silence was eerie. No wind, no insects, no distant coyotes. Then we saw it. A faint, hazy light hovering about 20 feet above the lake bed, roughly the size of a car hood, pale and steady with no visible source. We stood frozen, not by force, but by an instinctive understanding. Like sensing a predator in darkness, our bodies knew something was happening before our minds could process it. We didn't speak or move. After what felt like 5 minutes, the lights slowly faded. Suddenly, the wind rushed back as if nothing had happened. My weekend getaway near an old missile silo started out like a typical camping trip. I'd driven from Lincoln, Nebraska, seeking quiet time away from work and city noise. The spot I found was just a few miles from a decommissioned site. Nothing but concrete bunkers, rusted fences, and an unsettling silence hanging in the air. I parked my RV in a clearing, set up the satellite dish, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful weekend of reading and maybe a short hike. The evening was clear, with a gentle breeze and a slight chill. Around 10 p.m., I checked my watch before turning in for the night. Everything seemed normal until just before 3 a.m., when a deep, low hum began to vibrate through the entire camper. It wasn't particularly loud, but felt almost physical, like the ground itself was resonating. I sat up trying to identify the source. Was it distant machinery, a truck on the gravel road? But there was nothing. No engine sounds, no headlights, just that persistent hum. At exactly 3 a.m., strange things started happening. My phone screen flickered, resetting to 12 a.m. for a brief moment before returning to the correct time. The camper's lights dimmed momentarily, and the radio crackled with static before going silent and then coming back on. Every electronic device seemed to glitch just for a couple of seconds. Someone had hit play on a paused scene. Dust swirled around our legs, and the brush rustled. The spell broke. We retreated into the tent, zipping it closed. My watch still read 246. When morning came, the campsite looked untouched. Everything seemed normal, except our watches. All 4 of them had stopped at 2:46 despite the sun being well up. We tried tapping them, resetting, changing batteries. Nothing worked. Heather didn't want to discuss it, and we kept it from the kids. We packed up early and left that afternoon instead of staying another night. The drive back was quiet. I still have my watch in a drawer somewhere, and it has never worked again. Night after night, something strange was happening near the abandoned missile silo. The ground would vibrate with a low dun-dun, almost living hum that started just before 3 a.m. each morning. I'd wake up unsettled, noticing odd electronic glitches that seemed to coincide with this mysterious phenomenon. The silo had been out of commission since the 1980s, with no nearby radio signals to explain the strange occurrences. Looking up through the mesh, the stars seemed normal again. By morning, everything looked unchanged. Parked off a 2-track road near Marfa, Texas, my campsite sat in a typical desert landscape, flat, dry ground with scrub brush and hard-panned dirt. Old silos and trees surrounded me, miles from anything. Days seemed normal, but an unsettling sensation lingered. Something watched from the surrounding landscape. The first hint of strangeness came with a blank file timestamp at 3:01 a.m. Wind carried odd metallic smells reminiscent of ozone or burnt wire. No one in town reported hearing the hum or experiencing similar electronic issues when I asked around. By the 3rd night, I was determined to understand what was happening. Standing outside my RV around 2:45 a.m., thick grey clouds completely obscured the stars. The vibration began slowly, more like a frequency you could feel rather than a typical mechanical sound. A faint, pulsing orange glow appeared around the top edge of the silo's dark silhouette strange, given that the moon was completely blocked. Precisely at 3 a.m., The hum reached its peak and then abruptly stopped. My electronics went haywire. The phone shut off and rebooted. The radio crackled into silence. Even the small LED lights on my RV's control panel flickered. For a moment, everything was dead quiet. Then the glow vanished, and the clouds seemed to momentarily part. The aftermath was equally bizarre. My phone's battery had dropped nearly 20% overnight. The radio developed a persistent weak buzz, and my laptop contained mysterious blank text. Documents time-stamped at 3:01 a.m. documents I hadn't created and couldn't explain. By the fourth night, curiosity overcame my unease. I decided to record audio on my phone, determined to stay awake past 3 a.m. When the familiar hum peaked precisely at 3, I heard something unexpected. A faint, mechanical clicking beneath the vibration. Steady and rhythmic, it didn't resemble any natural sound. A quick glance out the window caught a fleeting shadow near the silo's edge. It vanished when I blinked. Though tempted to leave, I remained intrigued. What could explain these phenomena? My research into military sites and electromagnetic fields offered no satisfactory answers. The fifth night brought more intense experiences. Each night, the pattern repeated, leaving me more confused and unsettled than before. Could towers, power plants, or factories explain the strange occurrences? Yes. No. I was out in the desert, half a mile from anything or anyone, exactly how I wanted it. Solo camping was my thing, and I'd done this plenty of times before. My small tent with its mesh roof let me watch the stars, and I always packed water, some food, and a satellite phone for emergencies. This particular night was typical, dry, and windy. The wind died down after sunset, and I spent time stargazing. The Milky Way was crystal clear, with a few meteors streaking across the sky. I remember how incredibly quiet everything was. No insects, no coyotes, just absolute silence. I fell asleep around 11 o'clock without my watch and with my phone off to save battery. When I woke up later, the darkness was intense, the kind that feels heavy and oppressive. At first, nothing seemed wrong, but then I realized the stillness was unnatural. The desert is never this silent. Usually you hear something, an owl, a distant dog, your own breathing. But now, complete silence, like someone had muffled the entire world. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. What I saw stopped me cold. A perfect 20-foot circle surrounded my tent. The ground inside darker than the surrounding area. The scrub and brush were completely gone, replaced by blackened bare earth. Strangely, there was no heat, no burn smell. When I touched the ground, it was different. I unlocked and stepped outside just before 3 a.m. A cloudless, starless sky surrounded me. The hum returned, louder and more powerful. Air vibrated, creating a slight pressure in my ears. An orange glow pulsed softly around the silo. At exactly 3 a.m., everything stopped. My watch and phone went silent for 10 seconds. The radio died completely. No static, no control panel lights extinguished. Then, just as suddenly, everything flickered back to life and the glow disappeared. I waited outside another half hour, but nothing more occurred. The next morning, my electronics seemed perfectly normal. No strange files, no drained batteries, no radio interference. I packed up and left before darkness fell. Driving away, I watched the silo fade into the distance, pondering whether the events were tied to that specific location or simply an unexplained natural phenomenon. No one I've spoken with has experienced anything similar, and I never found a satisfactory explanation. Even now, late at night, a faint hum sometimes echoes in my mind, not loud, but just enough to make me pause and wonder, was it real or merely a trick of imagination? I nor cold and hard. The landscape seemed methodically erased. I scanned the area carefully. Nothing was disturbed except for this precise circular mark. My rucksack sat untouched in the distance. The circle's edge was razor-sharp, as if created by a giant compass. One side showed typical desert terrain, rocks, rough brush, pale dirt. The other side was a smooth, dark patch that defied explanation. No fire remnants existed, no traces of smoke, heat, or smell. Just dry, cold silence, and this inexplicable circle in the middle of nowhere. That night, while camping, darkness fell, and I stared upward. The sky was completely still. No clouds, no planes, no satellites, just unmoving stars. The longer I watched, the more unsettling the stillness became. Something felt profoundly unnatural. I retreated to my tent, zipping it closed. Sleep was impossible. Flashlight in hand, I lay awake, listening to the profound silence and watching the mesh ceiling. Near dawn, a faint humming caught my attention, low and deep, like a distant generator. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound grew slightly louder, then gradually faded, not passing by, but seemingly diminishing until it disappeared completely. At sunrise, I investigated. The circular burn mark remained, looking almost artificial with edges too precise, as if stamped onto the ground. I packed quickly, skipping breakfast and coffee. Hiking back to my truck, I constantly glanced over my shoulder, though I couldn't explain why. At my truck, I checked the tires and sat momentarily, scanning the barren landscape. No vehicles, no trails, just familiar desert terrain of scrub and rocks. I drove directly to Alpine and checked into a cheap motel, spending 2 nights trying to rationalize my experience. Later that week, I examined my camping gear. Everything appeared normal. No damage, no scorch marks. But my compass was slightly off. When compared to my phone and a second compass, those two matched perfectly. My camping compass kept drifting, refusing to settle. I considered reporting the incident but quickly dismissed the idea. Who would listen? 3 weeks later, I returned to the exact location in broad daylight. The circle was gone. The ground was dry and cracked, typical of the desert, with a few green shoots emerging. No trace remained of that strange night. The landscape bore an unsettling emptiness. Where fire had blazed through, nothing returned to fill the void. The ground appeared scoured and lifeless, as if deliberately erased. No new brush sprouted within the burned circle, and the terrain remained stubbornly bare. An eerie vacancy hung over the area, defined by a profound absence that seemed to resist natural regeneration. I apologize, but the text you've provided seems to be a fragment or incomplete passage. It doesn't appear to be a complete script or paragraph that can be meaningfully restructured. Could you provide the full text you would like me to rewrite